Good morning, and thank you for joining our webinar to learn more about ERA's $50 million Industrial Transformation Challenge. My name is Mark Summers, and I'm the Chief Innovation Officer with Emissions Reduction Alberta, or ERA. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Justin Reamer, our CEO, and Grace Meikle, our Technology Strategy Lead. Thank you, Justin and Grace, for joining us this morning. The three of us are all broadcasting from the tropics of Edmonton, Alberta. And before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge where we are. In the spirit of reconciliation, we have the privilege of living, working, and investing on traditional territories, which include Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 nations, Métis Nations, Region 3 and 4, Inuit, and all others who have lived and cared for these lands for centuries. Acknowledgements like this are only a part of the first steps on a journey toward reconciliation. And before we get into the agenda, I'd like to start by going through a few housekeeping items just to make sure we get the most out of our time today. First of all, we're expecting a lot of participants today. I think we have more than 600 registrations, and I can see about 250 on the line so far. Because of that, everyone's microphone is muted to avoid unintentional background noise. Now, if you encounter technical challenges related to the webinar connection, you're welcome to email my colleague Kevin at kduncan@eralberta.ca, and we will try to help if we can. However, if you can't resolve your technical issues, or if you need to leave early, or if something happens, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our website. It will be uploaded to our webpage for the Industrial Transformation Challenge, which is linked right from our homepage and on our funding page. The recording will include both the presentation and the live Q&A with an audio feed. In terms of an agenda for today, we have about 1 hour together. First, our CEO, Justin, will talk briefly about ERA and our mandate as an organization. Next, we'll provide an overview of the Industrial Transformation Challenge that was announced at COP27 in Egypt on Monday, November 14th, a couple weeks ago. We'll cover some key points regarding scope and eligibility for the call. We'll talk about the submission process and the timelines around the funding decision. We'll also provide a little bit of advice for anyone who's interested in making a submission. And finally, we'll end off by answering some of your questions. So if you do have any questions you'd like us to address, please type them into the questions pane or section of the GoToWebinar control panel as we go along. We will answer as many questions as we can, but if we don't address your question, you're welcome to follow up with us afterward. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our CEO, Justin Reamer.
Thanks very much, Mark, and hello, everybody. Great to be with you today. So most people don't realize this, but ERA has been around since 2009. And since that time, we've invested the proceeds from carbon pricing on large industrial emitters to reduce greenhouse gases and strengthen the competitiveness of new and existing industries in Alberta. So it's really important to understand that we have a dual mandate. We have a mandate to invest in technologies that would reduce GHG emissions, as well as grow the economy and accelerate the development and adoption of innovative technological solutions. Our funding is sourced from those large emitters who are required to reduce their GHG emissions to meet regulated targets under the Government of Alberta's tier regulation. And we offer a clear line of sight from these funds to the investments in technological solutions needed to help achieve emissions reduction and economic growth. To date, ERA has committed over $821 million to support over 230 projects valued at $6.5 billion. This large project value reflects our ability to leverage funding, and is something our organization is very proud about, is our leverage factor. For every dollar ERA commits to advancing new technologies, $7 hasn't been invested by our funding partners, whether that be groups in the private sector, firms in the private sector, or other public entities funding similar technological programs. These investments will lead to creation an equivalent of over 33,000 person-year jobs by 2025 in Alberta and contribute over $4.9 billion to Alberta's GDP. When we factor these numbers in nationally, those numbers jump to 45,000 worth of person-year jobs and $6.6 billion nationally. To date, we are on track to deliver cumulative GHG reductions of 40 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030 and 98 million tons by 2050. And that 98 million tons, just to give you a parameter, is 55% of Alberta's current industrial emissions. So that's a lot of tons. With this challenge, these numbers will only grow. And then again, want to reinforce that our funding is sourced from the Government of Alberta's TIER Fund. Our guiding document in terms of where we are planning on making our investments is guided by our technology roadmap. And I'd encourage you to go to our website and download a copy. It's an excellent document and serves as a catalyst for our technology and solution investments and is all-encompassing in terms of sectors in Alberta. In fact, it's sector agnostic. We are focusing on investing in technological platforms. Primarily, it guides our investments and lays out the pathway for Alberta to become a global hub for innovation and technology. You may have noticed this year we revised our TRM, our technology roadmap, to reflect the significant disruptions felt locally and across the globe. The geopolitical unrest we're experiencing, economic challenges, shifting investor focus, and our recent global health pandemic. The TRM, or technology roadmap, outlines the right mix of short, medium, and long-term technologies that will help Alberta realize its environmental and economic goals and support Canadian emission targets. The most significant change to the TRM is that focus on cross-cutting technology areas of investment. These include carbon sequestration, future fuels, energy efficiency, industrial transformation, and the circular economy. These are the technology areas we consider to have the greatest potential on Alberta's GHG emissions and economy, as well as the most relevant for our jurisdictions and sectors. Each technology has unique investment and deployment needs. So in this slide, we're presenting our high-level perspective on these technologies, their timeline to market adoption, the GHG reduction potential, and the anticipated economic benefits. The size of the technology circles reflects the amount of potential they have in reducing GHG emissions. And depending where you sit in the ecosystem, you may see the placement of these focus areas differently. It's important to point out, though, that although the focus areas are plotted at one spot along the market adoption timelines on the scale, there are different technological solutions across different timescales in each area. So our technology roadmap and our business plan guide our investments. And I'll quickly share how it works from there. Projects are selected primarily through competitive funding opportunities. A few are highlighted here, and of course, you are here today to learn about our latest industrial transformation opportunity. Through that challenge, ERA will continue to support the mission of the Government of Alberta's TIER Fund by supporting innovative technology solutions for industrial facilities in the province. We also have a partnership intake program, which is a continuous intake program designed to increase efficiency of our funding process. It supports promising technologies outside our funding calls and allows us to work closely with our trusted partner network. So who is our trusted partner network? Partnerships are central to our success and critical to delivering on the commitment to commercialization. And technology innovation is a team sport. Working with trusted partners across our innovation ecosystem allows ERA to leverage funds, due diligence, share risk, and reduce administrative burdens for applicants. We work very closely with strategic trusted partners in Alberta, with the federal government, and across the country where appropriate. A few of these include Alberta Innovates, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDDC, Natural Resources Canada. And two of our most recent partners include Prairies Can and Canada Infrastructure Bank. Really, by aligning with existing provincial and federal supports for industrial decarbonization, of which there's a growing level and value of support in these areas, ERA is intending to leverage significant private and public funding with this funding call. So with that short overview, I'm going to hand it over to the talented Mark Summers, who's going to provide you with the deep details on Industrial Transformation Challenge.
Yeah, thanks very much, Justin. I'm delighted that we're here today to talk about ERA's recently launched Industrial Transformation Challenge. If anyone in the audience missed the announcement, this was launched by Justin alongside Minister Sonia Savage at the COP27 meeting in Egypt. This investment from the government of Alberta through the Tier Fund is focused on key solutions for achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions and securing the competitiveness of both existing and new industries in Alberta. We know that Alberta's industries account for approximately 2/3 or so of the province's greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that Alberta's industrial operators are the backbone of the provincial economy. Investment in solutions that help to reach net zero can unlock significant first mover advantages for Alberta's economic sector in existing and emerging economic sectors, and contributing to both competitiveness and resilience for the province as a whole. So in terms of our objectives, or ERA's goal for this call, first of all, this is targeting the industrial transformation focus area outlined in our technology roadmap that Justin mentioned. And we're looking for solutions that can achieve the dual objective of greenhouse gas emissions and economic benefits. Ultimately, we want competitive industries and a prosperous Alberta as the world transitions toward a net zero greenhouse gas economy. This is, after all, ERA's vision for the future. But if we drill down a level, what is it specifically that this call is focused on? Well, as the name alludes to, we're looking for transformative technology that has deep step change greenhouse gas reduction potential. What distinguishes this focus area in our technology roadmap from energy efficiency, for example, is that it's about doing things differently rather than doing the same thing incrementally more efficient. And the idea here is that these technologies, in addition to energy efficiency and our other technology roadmap focus areas, will create the pathway to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So we're looking beyond the first mile solutions and the easily captured low-hanging fruit, so to speak. And we're seeking out new processes or new chemistries to create the same product, or in some cases, low carbon products or new industries even, or new technologies that use different energy sources for industrial operations like electrification or hydrogen use at an industrial site. Now, I should say we're not focused on the upstream production of those energy sources for wholesale markets, for example. We're planning to target those investments in an upcoming call, and we're supporting some of that on an ongoing basis through our partnership program that Justin talked about. But this competition is really focused on bringing new innovation and new technology specifically to industrial operations. So in terms of what it is exactly that we're funding, let me start by saying that we fund capital P projects, projects with clear objectives, milestones, timelines, deliverables, and a budget. The goal of our funding is to accelerate technology from point A to point B in the advancement toward commercialization. We don't fund ongoing operations or open-ended programs like a 5-year research program, for example. Now, in terms of the timelines for these projects, in this challenge, the maximum length for a project is 3 years from initiation, plus up to 1 year of operational time where applicable. Now, just for clarity, what we mean is that development, design, construction, and commissioning of a technology or an installation needs to fit within a 3-year period. But if we're funding a large-scale technology demonstration or deployment, and we're asking for the outcomes and learnings from that project, which I'll talk about in a minute, we want to see up to a year of post-commissioning operational time to generate sufficient performance data. And then in terms of project initiation, applicants that are awarded funding will be required to commence the work on the project within 120 days of ERA funding approval, which is anticipated for June of 2023. Now, having said that, at ERA's discretion, successful applicants may request a delayed start date of up to 12 months after funding approval in cases where there is a need to align with facility operations or scheduled turnarounds. We understand that many industrial operations have limited windows where retrofits or changes can be made without disrupting the facility operations. And finally, on this slide, the project location must be in Alberta. In some cases, there can be early project work that happens outside of the province, but we want to see the benefits of the project in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, jobs, and then ultimately beyond the project, market adoption of the technologies in the province of Alberta. So let's talk dollars. We're making a total of up to $50 million available for this competition, with up to $10 million on a per project basis. Now, there's an asterisk on the slide beside that 10 million. If you look in the program guide document, which I encourage everyone to do, you'll notice a statement that we anticipate funding projects at no more than $7 million. And that's in order to optimize the total funding available across a portfolio of solutions. And further, it states that we'll only award $10 million in exceptional cases. So my advice here is not to necessarily fixate on the $7 million figure or the $10 million figure, but rather to carefully consider how much money is needed to make your project happen, and not request more just because more might be available within the maximum amount. We also have a minimum funding request of $250,000 in this call to reflect the scale of solutions and the scale of projects that we're targeting here. As is always the case, ERA will only match contributions toward eligible expenses on a one-to-one basis. Now, what's new in this call that we've never done before is adjust the date after which we can contribute to eligible expenses. I'll mention this again on a later slide, but for this call, projects can start accruing eligible expenses after the date of the full project proposal deadline. Now, of course, we won't match any costs unless the project is approved for funding and a contribution agreement is signed. But we made this adjustment for the benefit of applicants that want to get started on their projects while they're in the final stages of our evaluation process. In other words, to keep momentum going if they're continuing on from previous projects or previous work. Also, as is always the case, we are working in partnership with other funding organizations in Alberta and across Canada, as Justin already talked about. In some cases, there may be an opportunity for us to share your proposals with trusted partners of ours and explore the possibility for additional funding available from those organizations. We've designed the Industrial Transformation Challenge to build on Alberta's strengths, including a talented workforce, numerous industrial operations available to host projects, and concentrated clusters of industrial activity. So, who is it that should apply, and who's eligible for ERA funding? Well, if anyone was here on the line, was at our event earlier this week in Calgary, we said that ERA is built on the philosophy that good ideas can come from anywhere. And indeed, we're open to applications from just about any type of entity: industrial operators, small and medium-sized enterprises, Indigenous communities, universities, not-for-profit organizations, and others. And because good ideas can come from anywhere, applicants themselves are not required to be Alberta-based. I mentioned this already. We want the projects themselves to be constructed and operated in Alberta, but the technology and the companies developing the technology can be located elsewhere. And so, because of that, partnerships, while not strictly necessary, can often present a really strong value proposition. And because this is the Industrial Transformation Challenge, involvement from industrial operators is critical, whether that's an existing industrial operation or new players entering the market. We need to see that the technology will be demonstrated in Alberta and that there's a market pull or a market opportunity in the province. Furthermore, I want to encourage everybody to work with Alberta's post-secondary and research institutions and Indigenous communities where you can. These partnerships can develop, attract, and retain skilled workers, increase our innovation capacity as a province, and can also support local communities. The final thing I want to note on this slide is that you'll notice also a statement in the program guide that applicants may, at their discretion, submit more than one application from the same company. However, we encourage you to be selective and put forward your highest potential projects. Furthermore, because we think the number of ideas out there will far exceed our ability to fund, it's unlikely we'll fund the same company twice in this call, so please keep that in consideration. Now, in terms of what's eligible, we do not have an exhaustive list of eligible technologies. In fact, the most important message I can leave with you on this slide and on this topic is that the onus is on you, the applicant, to demonstrate that your project fits with the goals of this challenge, that the technology is transformative, innovative, and has deep greenhouse gas reduction potential. In some cases, we don't know what's out there and what's under development. As an aside, that's one of my favorite things is when we get to see those black swans, the technology we didn't know that we didn't know about. Now, having said that, some areas we think there could be good solutions in include things like you see on this slide, like electrification of industrial heat or on-site clean heat production, for example, maybe small modular nuclear, thermal energy storage, hydrogen-powered equipment or processes at an industrial site, or process electrification building on industrial heat electrification, or novel hydrocarbon extraction that can approach net zero upstream emissions, including electrified or non-aqueous processes, or again, application of small modular nuclear at these hydrocarbon extraction sites. New processes or chemistries for cement, minerals, chemicals, fertilizer, plastics, pulp and paper, upgrading refining, and other industries. And another slide of examples that includes transformative agriculture technologies and practices including electrification, advanced fertilizers, and mitigation of agricultural methane emissions, novel alternative proteins, step changes in fugitive methane management, and this is cross-industrial, solutions for high global warming potential gases, and innovative new low carbon industries and products, which could include hydrocarbons beyond combustion or bitumen beyond combustion, for example, high value energy materials like lithium, zircon, or others, and advanced manufacturing. I should also note that there are a couple areas we've specifically outlined in the program guide as being out of scope. These are outlined, as I said, in the program guide and include, for example, detection, quantification, measurement, and monitoring of emissions. Also include incremental efficiency or incremental fuel switching improvements, and digital solutions like controls, automation, logistics, and others that offer efficiency improvements. These solutions are all important to ERA's mandate and to our portfolio, but are not targeted in this particular funding competition. So in terms of the stages of development for technologies, what we're seeking is technologies that by the end of the project can reach the stages shown on the slide here, including field testing or piloting, commercial demonstration, or first of kind commercial implementation. If you speak in the language of TRL, this represents approximately TRL 6 through 9 or technology readiness level 6 through 9. But to be clear, the technology at current stages or before the start of the project can be at an earlier stage of development, but must reach field testing, piloting, demonstration, or commercial implementation by completion of the project. Now, I'll mention very quickly that for most projects, we're seeking and anticipating that projects will include a demonstration or advancement of technology over the course of the project, and that standalone or pre-construction elements such as a feed study or detailed engineering can be considered as part of a larger project, but generally not as a standalone project. However, some standalone pre-construction projects, such as a feed study or detailed engineering, may be considered in exceptional cases where such a project provides clear and significant value in advancing a particular technology with transformative potential. All right, so I'll run through our submission and evaluation process here, and on the next slide, I'll talk about the timelines of this process. As you can see in the diagram, we have and continue to use a two-stage evaluation process, which is followed by execution of the project. In the expression of interest stage, or EOI stage, applicants are invited to provide an overview of their proposed project. This is a relatively short document, 10 pages maximum, and must be submitted using our online system by the January 19th deadline. Just to note, we will not extend the deadline and we will not accept late submissions. After all the EOIs have been submitted, they are evaluated by a team of independent experts. We bring together a team of evaluators with subject matter expertise in business, financing, science, engineering, and greenhouse gas quantification. After the EOI evaluation process, a short list of projects will be invited to submit a full project proposal, which includes more detail about the proposed project itself and the expected outcomes of the project and the plan for implementing the project. At the full project proposal stage, a proposal advisor is assigned to each of the applications at the time that the invitation is sent out. This advisor is made available to help guide applicants through the process and provide feedback for the full proposals and oral presentations while they're under development. After the FPPs are submitted, they are again evaluated by an independent team of experts, and the full proposal applicants will be invited to offer a presentation to the entire evaluation team. This process culminates with an in-depth review meeting where all projects are discussed in detail, and a recommendation is then brought forward to our board of directors for consideration. All final funding decisions, I should note, are made by ERA's board of directors. And then after the funding decisions are made, we enter into legal agreements with the successful applicants, and those agreements detail the terms and obligations of each party as it relates to our contribution and to completion of the project. ERA's funding is then distributed on a milestone by milestone basis, and the progress of each milestone is monitored and reported on throughout the course of the project. At the end of the project, all recipients are required to produce a final outcomes report, which is ultimately shared publicly for the broader benefit of Alberta. And the final thing to note about our process is that the entire process is overseen by an independent fairness monitor that reports directly to ERA's board of directors. As for timelines, you can see on the slide here, the deadline for submission is January 19th, 2023 at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, sharp, and that deadline will not be extended. Projects that are shortlisted in the EOI phase will be notified by early March and will have until late April to provide their full project proposals. Oral presentations from each of the FPP applicants will be scheduled in the spring and will ultimately notify successful applicants after ERA's board meeting in June. From there, successful applicants will enter into a contribution agreement with ERA, which will address the project scope, work plan, milestones, deliverables, performance targets, payment schedule, reporting requirements, terms of funding, and other elements related to our funding contribution. Now, further to my point about sharing final reports, I want to take a moment to say that ERA's funding is grant funding. It's non-dilutive. We don't take an ownership stake in the companies, and we don't take an ownership stake in intellectual property, and our payment is not repayable. So it is pure grant funding. And so what we expect in return is ultimately benefits to the province of Alberta. And one of those benefits comes through the sharing of knowledge and learnings from the projects that we fund. So we actively share the outcomes through those final reports and through other mediums with the public and for the broader benefit of Alberta. So we're active on social media, including LinkedIn and Twitter. We also have a video series. You can see in the bottom left of this slide a clip from one of the videos. We highlight a number of our projects in a video series on our YouTube channel. We have a podcast called Carbon Copy. There's a number of episodes already available. And we host lessons learned workshops where we put successful applicants after the completion of their project in front of an audience of their peers and others to talk about the technology they've developed and the learnings from their project. You can see a photo in the top right from one of our early lessons learned activities from before the pandemic. Now, I want to take a moment to share with you that your feedback as an applicant community and as innovators is really important to us. We were created in 2009 and built on the principle of continuous improvement. And as such, we're constantly tweaking our processes to try and make things better for everyone involved. So for this call, I want to share a couple highlights of changes we're making based on feedback that we've received from you, the applicants, and those that have gone through our process in the past. Now, I'll say most of these are at the full project proposal stage, which is where the bulk of the work happens on the applicant end. The expression of interest is intentionally designed to be much more intensive, resource and energy intensive. So a couple of changes that we're making, I already talked about this, but the earlier start date for eligible cost sharing at the full project proposal deadline, whereas it used to be after funding approval is received from our board of directors. In this particular call, we're trying to shorten the timelines from the date where proposals are due until the date where our funding decisions are made. We've heard that we need a little bit of a quicker turnaround, and these are some of the shortest call timelines that we've ever used in the past. We've cut it down by probably at least a month from our previous funding competition, the Circular Economy Challenge. We're offering additional support and a different process for greenhouse gas quantification at the full project proposal stage. The details will be available once the FPP invitations are made, but we recognize that this is one of the onerous elements of going through our process, and so we're trying to help applicants out more proactively and earlier in the process. We'll also be offering a simplified budget template at the full project proposal stage. We recognize and we've heard feedback that that template has been fairly onerous and a little bit time consuming to complete. So we want to make that simplified for the ease of applicants and to help shorten the timelines of the overall process. And there will be further improvements to come, but these are ones that we're implementing already in the Industrial Transformation Challenge. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about before we take your questions is a few pieces of advice on how to prepare a successful submission. I'll start by saying that we often receive 10 times or more funding requests than we can meet. So it's imperative that applicants make a strong case for why their project should be funded. I'll start out by saying first, I would recommend that you start the process now. From now until the submission deadline, there are about 7 weeks, but 6 if you exclude the holiday break. By the way, we do not expect anyone to work over the holiday break. When we knew that we had to make the deadline in January based on our call launch date, we intentionally pushed it out near the end of January so that there wasn't an expectation of a mad scramble to finalize a proposal over Christmas. Now, further to that point, we know it doesn't take 6 weeks or 7 weeks for that matter to put together a 10-page application. However, it does take time to forge partnerships, to get internal approvals, and to allocate resources. And while you don't need to have every internal approval and every partnership finalized by the EOI submission deadline, the further along you are in those processes, the better off you are in terms of demonstrating that your project is real and that it's ready to advance. Since all submissions need to be completed through our online portal, I suggest going there to register an account now if you don't already have one. And if you do, go back and make sure that you can still log on. Okay, next, and I really can't emphasize this enough, is to read the call for expressions of interest guidelines document. It's not a long document, and it answers most of the questions that we get on a regular basis. If you have a project that is not eligible or doesn't fit with this particular call for proposals, you can save yourself a lot of time by reading the guidelines and figuring that out early on. Okay, so the next point is really an extension of that last one, and that is to review the evaluation criteria, which are provided in that call for expressions of interest document. These are the criteria upon which each proposal is evaluated and shortlisted. And each of these criteria have different weightings. While they are all important and all need to be addressed, I encourage you to consider ensuring that sufficient effort is put toward those with a higher weighting. Now, building on that point, when you're completing the expression of interest document, it's important to use clear language and to address the points laid out in the template. Our evaluation team consists of subject matter experts, but if they can't decipher the information that's necessary to make a qualified assessment, or if the 10-page document is filled with extraneous information, they won't have the confidence to move the application forward in the process. And speaking of the 10-page limit, I think it's worth noting that you are welcome and encouraged to include optional letters of support. These letters of support do not count as part of the 10-page limit and can be highly beneficial. Do not wait until the last day to submit your application. I can tell you in the past, we have lost good opportunities because of deadlines that were missed. This is a matter of fairness. I already mentioned we have a fairness monitor. This is a matter of fairness to all applicants and something that we are firm on. If you do have a technical issue during the submission process, our IMS team is happy to help resolve technical issues and is responsive to the requests that come in. However, I can tell you that if you wait until the last day, it's entirely possible that we can't address all the last minute issues that arise. Now, I mentioned this already, but in some cases, there may be an opportunity for ERA to share your proposals with our trusted partners and explore the possibility of gaining additional funding from these organizations. During the process, you'll have the opportunity to allow us to share your proposals with our trusted partners, and I encourage you to do so. If you agree to this in the system, ERA will only share your application with partners where we have a non-disclosure agreement in place and for the sole purpose of exploring further funding leverage. Now, a couple comments in terms of the content of your application. First, remember that our funding comes from the Government of Alberta's carbon pricing system, the tier regulation. And as such, our mandate revolves around greenhouse gas benefits. It might be obvious to you how your technology results in greenhouse gas benefits, but it might not be obvious to everyone. So make sure that's crystal clear in the proposal. Remember also that this is not an energy efficiency call. You need to make the case that your technology is potentially disruptive and can have significant greenhouse gas deep reduction potential. We haven't defined a threshold for what constitutes incremental versus step change, as this varies based on the industry and the facility types. But remember that this is the case that you need to make. Also, you should clearly identify if a site for your project has been finalized, and if it hasn't been finalized, when in the process it will be finalized. And make a clear case why your project benefits more than just the applicant and your partners, and why ERA dollars will help the broader industry and the innovation community. This can include knowledge sharing, technology transfer, or dissemination channels, and other elements, for example. Okay, I'm almost done. Another point that ERA is in regular communication with other funding organizations, with our trusted partners. So in other words, we talk to each other. So make sure that you're telling the same story. Otherwise, it can raise questions and potentially red flags. Another suggestion I'd give is to take a look at our website. Look at the projects that we funded previously. This can give a sense for the scale and the nature of projects we support. It can also give a sense for whether your project is filling in an important technology gap in the Alberta marketplace and in our portfolio, or whether you're entering a crowded space. And if you are entering a crowded space, it might give you some insight into the competitive landscape. And finally, I've mentioned this a couple times already, but remember that this is a highly competitive process. Not only will you be compared to peers in the competition, but you'll also be compared against our portfolio and what's in the marketplace already. All right, well, if you've made it this far, and if you're still on the line, this is your opportunity to ask questions for Justin and for me. Please type your questions into the questions pane of the control panel in GoToWebinar, which is typically on the right-hand side of your screen. And while you're doing that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, our technology strategy lead, Grace Meikle, who will lead the Q&A session.
Thanks, Mark. We've got a number of questions on the chat, so I'll go in order. The first question is for Justin, and it's about our technology roadmap. Why does ERA see carbon sequestration as long-term market adoption versus future fuels being in the near term?
It's a great question. Thanks, Grace, and the person who asked the question. So what ERA is really looking at is a portfolio of investments. And so we are looking at investing in not a single silver bullet to manage GHG reductions. We believe carbon capture is a critical element to get a number of our industrial facilities, not just oil and gas, but cement, fertilizer, and electricity generation to net zero. It was interesting to see Capital Power yesterday announce its intention to proceed this next year with a full investment decision for their Genesee carbon capture plant, which is massive and sort of global leading in terms of what it's looking to do, and ERA was in part funded through that. So we do believe there's huge potential in the province for carbon capture, and to have initiated some projects to support feasibility studies in those areas across a number of high emitting sectors. But we're also interested in other areas, including the circular economy, of which we're just in the process of finalizing some funding decisions from our most recent call in that aspect. So really looking at that portfolio approach along the short, mid, and longer term.
Thanks, Justin. Yes, Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Grace, and thanks, Justin, and also thanks for the question. The only thing I'd add to that is that in the technology roadmap, that diagram is a simplification. And within each of those areas, including future fuels and including carbon sequestration, there's a range of solutions along timescales. There are near-term solutions and there are longer-term solutions. So this is a bit of a simplification, but overall, what we've seen in terms of deployment and advancement of technology to date has indicated that there are many future fuel solutions that are a little bit more advanced in terms of the near term or in terms of timescales than those in the carbon sequestration space. So that's all.
Thanks, Mark. And just kind of a follow-up to that from Isaac, does this call include carbon sequestration projects or CCS related projects?
Yeah, thanks very much. And I don't know if we indicated that very clearly in the guideline document, but the intention is no, that this call is not targeting that element of our portfolio, but rather the processes and chemistries and installations and fuels on site at industrial operations.
Thanks, Mark. Another question about the call. So you talked about how we want to see a year of operations. In the 3-year timeline, this is a question from Sean, can 1 year be used for construction and commissioning, and can the project include 2 years of operation?
That's a really good question, and one that I don't think we addressed in the program guide document. And the answer is yes. If there's a need for additional operational time to show greater seasonal variability or the operations over the course of a year-to-year period, additional time. Now, what I would say is that the 4-year window, or the 3 years plus 1 year, is still a limit that we want to hold to. So if you want to include additional timelines in the call for operational for operation to stabilize after commissioning or whatever the case is to gain further data, we'd still want to make sure it fits within that total 4-year window.
Thanks, Mark. I think you mentioned that projects can include some engineering work. So to clarify this is from Irene, the start date of a project approval is can include to start the project design, is not necessarily to start commissioning the project. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'd say that's a really good question, because when we talk about start date, we know that activities within innovators and industrial operators are always happening. Things don't just start when we put out a funding competition and award funding. So when we talk about start date, it's for the purposes of our contribution agreement and an envelope around which we talk about the dollars that are spent and the dollars that we contribute toward matching. So that can include engineering, and that can start, it can start as of the date of the full project proposal submission deadline, or it can start after. And it can be a continuation of activities such as feasibility or pre-feed or even feed or detailed engineering that are happening now. But ultimately, for the purposes of our contract, we need to identify when we're starting our ERA funded project and what costs contribute toward that and what the scope of work it is that we're supporting financially.
Thanks, Mark. One of the things you talked about is that we're not looking for kind of a 5-year open-ended research program. But to clarify, does that mean that a pilot project can still qualify for this call?
Yes, absolutely. And I maybe brushed over that fairly quickly, but pilot projects are absolutely eligible. We want to see technology advanced from earlier stages of development up to the stages of field testing or field pilots. A construction of a field pilot is right within our wheelhouse, and include some of that operational time of the field pilot. But in a case like that, that sort of goes back to what I mentioned, and perhaps I passed over it fairly quickly, that we want capital P projects with very clear objectives and deliverables and timelines. So a pilot project that will be completed, for example, by 2024 or 2025 and operated for 1 year fits into that description. And we want to see in the proposal, particularly in the second stage of our process, a lot more detail around the plan and the timelines for constructing, commissioning, and then operating that field pilot, for example.
Thanks, Mark. We've got a couple questions about stacking. Is there a stacking limit for this call?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a question that we often get in these webinars. And so maybe we should include it in future iterations in the slides. But nevertheless, happy to answer that question. So unlike some other funding organizations, we don't, strictly speaking, have a stacking limit. Our fund matching rule is that for every dollar we put into the project, there needs to be at least $1 of contribution from the applicant or from non-government programs, excluding municipalities, excluded from non-provincial or federal government programs. So we can't match dollars from the likes of our trusted partners at SDTC or NRCan or Alberta Innovates or others. So that is our primary requirement, that we need to see one-to-one matching. Now that can be stacked or leveraged with other government funders. So for example, a very oversimplified example, if we're funding alongside one of our trusted partners in the federal government, for example, SDTC, there could be, let's say, a $3 million project where we're contributing 1 million, SDTC is contributing 1 million, and the applicant is contributing 1 million. And so in that case, we don't have a stacking limit of 50%, yet our dollars are being matched 1-to-1 with those private dollars. Now, the flip side to this is, I will say, we always want to see that there is a demonstrated interest from the marketplace, a market pull, for as they say, and that the opportunity has a pathway to commercialization. And so at some point, depending on the level of government funding, if it reaches, let's say, about 2/3 or 75%, questions will start to come up around, okay, why does this project need so much government funding? Does that indicate that there's a lack of interest from the private sector or from private investors? So while there's no strict stacking limit, we start to ask those questions at around, the example that I talked about, perhaps up to beyond 50% or around 2/3 of government funding.
And since we were just talking about matching, can you clarify, is in-kind matching considered part of the match?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I would point you to our eligible expenses guidelines document. So there are some expenses that are commonly considered in kind that are eligible for matching. For us, and this is an oversimplification, but ultimately we want to support incremental go forward costs associated with the project. So there are some costs that can be considered in kind, such as, for example, salaried employees from a partner organization, where there's actually a cash outlay from the organization to those employees to contribute and work on the project. That would be considered eligible, but I can't lay it out all here. I would encourage you to go through it. Again, it's not a long document, and it lays out quite a bit of detail about what we consider eligible and what we consider not eligible in terms of expenses.
Thanks, Mark. This next question from Richard is about timelines. So the comment is, recognizing you said the timelines are very firm, the comment is that they're very short. Do you have some advice about how to meet the timelines and also future opportunities in case these timelines cannot be met for this call?
Yeah, there's a couple questions wrapped up in there, and we appreciate that the timelines are fairly tight, and we always want to balance the fact that from the time that we launch a call to the time that we approve and announce funding for a project, we don't want that to be inordinate. For your sake, in some cases, technology can get stale in the time after we've launched a funding call to the time that we've announced and approved funding for a project. So we're necessarily trying to shorten those timelines throughout the process, both on our end, as well as to, as I talked about, streamline things so it's a little bit easier for applicants to meet those timelines. So yeah, recognizing that the timelines are short, my advice is, and previously I mentioned this on a previous slide, that get as far as you can in terms of finalizing things like partnerships, financing, sites, technology before the expression of interest deadline. But remember that not all of those things need to be firmly finalized by the expression of interest deadline. And after you've submitted an expression of interest, as you would probably want to do regardless of funding from ERA, I encourage folks to keep advancing their projects while we're completing our evaluation. And if you're invited to submit a full project proposal during the development of that detailed proposal. And then if you end up missing the timelines for this competition, going back to what Justin talked about and what I talked about already, this will not be our only funding competition. We are anticipating having future funding initiatives. We're also accepting proposals on a referral basis through our trusted partners. So we're not the only funder in the system. There are a number of others. Our closest trusted partner, Alberta Innovates, SDTC, Natural Resources Canada, and a number of others in the federal government, in the province, and elsewhere. So I'd encourage you to reach out to others, and there could be an opportunity through our partnership intake program on an ongoing basis if the deadlines are missed for us to give consideration to a project.
Thanks, Mark. So I think both you and Justin talked about transformative versus incremental opportunities. I've got a couple of questions about clarifying what a step change in methane management looks like. I know that you said that we don't have specific targets, but just looking for some clarity on what that looks like to ERA.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I might suggest if there's sort of specific opportunities we're looking at, perhaps to follow up with the ERA team offline on this. It's hard to generalize, but methane, I guess, is a different example. We want to see opportunities with significant methane reduction potential. We know there are a lot of really good and commercially available methane management solutions out there. So ultimately, what distinguishes this from sort of incremental improvements is, as I talked about, new technologies or new innovations to target large methane reductions that are beyond what's commercially available, what's in operation right now. And again, as I mentioned, if we want to have a conversation with the ERA team, we're happy to talk about it. Feel free to reach out to our team at applications@eralberta.ca, and we'll get back to you on fairly short order.
Thanks, Mark. I know you said we're providing more support than before on our GHG reductions piece of the application. Question is from Morgan, is there a recommended method to use for carbon reduction calculation for the proposal?
Yeah, thanks very much. What I would say is at the expression of interest stage, it's important to have both a qualitative and a quantitative sense for greenhouse gas emission reduction potential. But at this stage, we're not going to dig deep into the nuances of your quantification methodology. We want to understand that it's an appropriate baseline and that on an order of magnitude basis, there is opportunity and potential for significant reductions. Now, when we get to the full proposal stage, if you're invited to submit a full project proposal, that's actually one of the differences that we're undertaking in this competition is we're going to ask all applicants and require that all applicants reach out to our greenhouse gas quantification team early on. And we're going to support you in terms of ensuring that the right quantification methodologies are used, or the most appropriate and most aligned with our accounting systems are used to make sure that that you're not barking up the wrong tree, so to speak, or that there's no wasted effort, and that we're both ERA and the applicant organizations are aligned on that quantification.
Thanks, Mark. You mentioned, this is from Dean, you mentioned that upstream energy production is not eligible for this call, but that there will be a future program targeting this sector. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, for sure. And my words may have been a bit hasty. What I meant by that is when we're talking about what we're calling in our technology roadmap future fuels. So things like hydrogen production or renewable electricity production or biofuels or synthetic fuels or low carbon or no carbon fuels that can be sold into the marketplace on a wholesale basis. In other words, upstream production of what we call future fuels. That is not the focus of this call for proposals. Now, using some of those fuels or demonstrating technology at an industrial site that can make use of those fuels, for example, electrification of heat that I already talked about, is eligible. Now, just for clarity, industrial operations that are in the upstream oil and gas industry or upstream energy production industry right now are eligible. We want to see technology, transformative technology applied at those facilities, but rather what we're carving out and what we're focusing on in a future competition is really the large scale, market-wide wholesale production of those significant zero or low carbon energy sources. I hope that helps kind of clarify it.
Thanks. And I think we're getting close to time, so maybe just one more question. I think this is an important one. Are the details of the submission kept confidential within ERA, given that there won't be an agreement between ERA and the applicant?
Yes, I'll try to answer that quickly because you're right, we are at time. And the answer is yes, with the exception of, you'll notice it going through the submission process, there's a section where we talk about a non-confidential description. And that we will share in the event that the project is advanced through the process and approved for funding. But all other details in the expression of interest in the full project proposal are kept confidential within ERA. All right, thanks very much, Grace. That does bring us to the end of this webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, for your interest and your participation today. If you do have unanswered questions after this webinar and after reviewing our supporting materials, please feel free to email us using applications@eralberta.ca. Finally, just a reminder, we hope to have the webinar posted on our website by sometime early next week. Thank you once again and have a wonderful day.